Go a little deeper into the circumstances that converted the Avant Garde from radical to conservative. 1968 was a watershed year with confrontations between youth rebels and conservative authorities in Mexico, Paris, and Chicago. And by the way, it was the last time I was in Sao Paulo, and I recalled for my friends here that I was in Sao Paulo at that time, and I was introduced to a man who became a good friend, but I didn't know until that moment, Augusto Boal. And Boal was running a theater called the Arena Theater, which I was told I looked at from a distance last night, still is here. And when I met him, he asked me to come to his performance. I really don't remember the performance, but I do remember that some thugs broke into the theater and they used pistols and they shot real bullets. And they didn't kill anybody or hurt anybody, but they scared a lot of people, including Boal and me. And shortly thereafter, he left for Buenos Aires. Not exactly heaven, but at that time in Brazil, you know, it was the rule of the generals, and it was a very, very dark time. Etc. I'm sure some of you actually physically remember it. Others have parents and so on. At any rate, so that was the last time I was in Sao Paulo, and of course it's a different world now, but there are always ghosts. So 1968, that's when I'm talking about, and it was about this time. It was about end of July 1968. The conservatives defeated the students in the street, but not at that time in their minds. The rebellions in Mexico City, Paris, and the United States. In the USA, the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy brought an end to optimism with regard to real change coming from or being forced on the ruling classes. Many intellectuals and artists took shelter in academia, where they created a powerful avant-garde of theory. The displacement from the streets to seminar rooms accelerated during the 70s and 80s, 2 decades formative of performance studies, which is my discipline. So it's not by accident that I'm in a room like this, but it is by circumstance that I'm not in the street. In other words, 1968 was important to me also. I was already a young professor, but it confirmed to me that if things were to get done, they would have to be done in a kind of separate from the larger society. So other people made different choices, but I chose an artistic and academic career, like many of my colleagues did. Parallel to this, the late 1970s through to the early 90s, meaningful opposition to capitalism collapsed. Even with Lula and even with what's happened in Latin America, Chavez and so on, meaningful opposition, because at a certain level, the opposition is rhetorical. The opposition is about how to play the chess pieces, not a fundamental structural difference. In Europe, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the USSR in 1991. In China, the reforms of Deng Xiaoping, which he called socialism with Chinese characteristics, was accompanied by the bloody put-down of the Tiananmen Square democracy movement. Marxism as an economic system and liberatory ideal was dead, even though communists were still in power in China, North Korea, and Cuba. Among the tenured radicals stirred by these events, performance studies and post-structuralism continued as theory, the failed leftist student and artist-led upheavals. Now, later on, you're going to challenge me on this, I hope, in regard to Brazil, and tell me I'm making a total mistake and that Brazil is truly a socialist country and that it has equal distribution of wealth and all of that, and that there's no real capitalist triumph here. So I'm really looking forward to being corrected on this. All right. As the world accepted or had forced on it a capitalist market economy, academic Marxists and deconstructionists imagined a world shaped by speech acts and performatives, upended hierarchies, reversed binaries, and no more master narratives. These are all kind of academic buzzwords. What could not be accomplished by direct political action was thought about and theorized by us professors and our students. In this world, actual change in favor of ordinary people was no longer enacted. How could it be, given the rise of globalization? Instead, the change was figured as scholarship, imagined and theorized inside the corporation. Academic radicals exchanged ideas at conferences academia's version of the touring circuit. Artistic groups tour here and there, and academics go to conferences here and there. At present in the USA, corporate-minded universities are ditching tenure in favor of adjuncts and part-timers. In this insecure environment, most students and their parents get the message and turn to business, the sciences, law, or engineering. And I've gotten some drift that that's also true here to some degree. That even here I was told that the social sciences were accused of being not really scientific, and that science tilts towards the mathematics, the engineering, the hard sciences, et cetera. It's also interesting, at least in the United States, if not here, that there's still a huge gender gap. Derrida, Jacques Derrida, a deconstructionist, French deconstructionist, said, and I'll translate it because why have it in two foreign languages, there's nothing outside the text. And what he meant by that is that everything that we do has, in a certain sense, been inscribed, already symbolized, before we can think about it. And I'm saying there's nothing outside the corporation. That is the interlocking system of actual corporations and the governments they control, not the other way around. The only opposition to the corporations comes from certain fundamentalist religious tendencies who have their own corporate structures and are opposed to the other corporate structures. But in the long run, I don't think that these fundamentalisms will persevere. And the happy things that we identify with the Arab Spring, I mean, it's part of the corporatization as well as the liberalization of those regimes.